This is part 16 of ADO.NET tutorial. In this video, we'll discuss AcceptChanges and RejectChanges methods. This is continuation to part 15, so please watch part 15 before proceeding. To understand AcceptChanges and RejectChanges methods better, we need to understand row states and row versions. Every data row that is present in a data table of a data set has got this row state property. The MSDN link that you see right here explains the different values of this row state property. We'll examine this link in just a bit. Let's flip to Visual Studio. This is the sample application that we worked with in the previous session. Let's drag and drop a button control, and let's double click that to generate the event handler. Now within the click event handler, we are going to retrieve the data set from cache, and then we are going to use a for each loop here. So for each data row, let's call it dir in dataset.tables of what is the name of the table within the data set? Students. So loop through each data row that is present within this table students. Okay, and then we want to print the row state of every row. And to retrieve row state, we are going to use the row state property of the data row object, and let's convert that to string. And to print this on the web form, let's use response.write. Let's also print student ID along with row state property value. Let's convert that to string, and let's separate the student ID and row state property value with a dash. Okay, and let's also use an HTML break so that the output of every row comes in a separate line. Alright, so with these changes, let's go ahead and run the application. So let's click this button, so data is loaded from this table TBL students. So now after the data is loaded into the data set, we didn't change any of the rows. Now when we click this button, look at that, rows 1 to 5, all of them, the row state is at the moment unchanged. Okay, so now let's actually edit one of the rows. Let's click update. So we modified the first row. Look at that, the first row state is modified, but the rest of the rows are unchanged. Now let's actually delete the second row and click this button. Look at that, we get an exception, and that's basically because for a deleted row there will not be current row version, it will only have original row version. But if you look at this piece of code here, it's trying to read the ID column value for a deleted row from the current row version, and that's the reason why we have this exception. We didn't discuss about row versions yet. We'll talk about them in just a bit, but first of all, let's go ahead and fix this exception. Let's flip to Visual Studio. So basically within this for each loop, we are going to check row state. So data row object dot row state, if that is equal to, and look at the different values of the row state. There are several of them. We'll talk about all of them in just a bit, but at the moment, if the row state is deleted, then what we want to do is we want to retrieve the ID column value from the original data row version. Okay, else retrieve the ID column value from the current row version. The default is current row, so basically we haven't specified that, so it's going to try and retrieve it from the current row version. Alright, so let's go ahead and run this now. Get data from database, and let's delete the second row. Click this button, look at that, second row is deleted and the rest of the rows are unchanged. Okay, so we have discussed about modified, deleted, and unchanged. Now let's discuss about added row state. So once we have retrieved the data set from the cache, I'm going to create a new data row. Let's call it new data row dataset.tables of students. dot new row. So new data row of ID, let's set the ID for this new data row to 101. Okay, and then let's associate this new data row with this table. So basically we want to add it to students table. And look at this. So this table, the data table, has got rows property, and look at what is this rows property returning. It's returning data row collection. So basically to the data row collection add this new data row, and to add that new data row to the data row collection, what method are we using? We are using add method. So basically at this point we have just added this new row to this data table. So the row state of that row should be added. So let's actually run this and see if that's what we get. So get data from database, click the button, look at that, 101. What is the row state? Added. Okay, now here we have added that row to data rows collection using add method. Now let's comment that line. So we have just created a new row, but we haven't associated that with a data row collection. So the state, the row state of this row at this point is detached. It is not associated with any data row collection. So here the row state is detached, and to print the row state, since it's not part of the data set object, it's not going to loop, basically it's not included in the rows collection here. So this for each loop is not going to print this new data row state. So let's go ahead and print that data row state. So response.write new data row dot row state dot toString. Let's run this. So get data from database, let's click that, look at that. What is the row state of that row? It is detached. Basically it's not associated with any data row collection. So here is that MSDN link which explains all that row state property values. So here are the different row state values. Unchanged, no changes have been made since the last call to AcceptChanges, or since the row was created by DataAdapter.Fill. Okay, added, the row has been added to the table, but AcceptChanges has not been called. We didn't discuss AcceptChanges. We'll discuss that in just a bit. And modified, some of the elements of the rows has been modified. Deleted, the row has been deleted from the table, and AcceptChanges has not been called. Once we call AcceptChanges, what's going to happen? It's going to reset the row state. We'll discuss that in just a bit. And what is this detach? The row is not part of any data row collection. The row state of a newly created row is set to detach after the new data row is added to the data row collection by calling the add method. The value of the row state property is set to added. I've seen that practically. And along the same lines, detached is also set for a row that has been removed from a data row collection using the remove method, or by the delete method followed by the AcceptChanges method. Okay, so those are different row states, and along with row states we also have row versions, and here are the different row versions. And these current and original row versions are very straightforward. So for every row there will be a current row version and an original row version. So original row version is going to contain the original values, and current row version is going to contain the current values. So basically, for example, when we edit a row and change the name, for example here, so the current value is going to contain Mark. The original value is going to contain Mark Hastings. Okay, so that is current and original. And this row version, basically the current row version, does not exist for rows with a row state of deleted. Okay, they will only have original state. And if you remember, we got an exception when this code was, when this len was not present. We got an exception when we had a deleted row. Okay, that's because deleted rows will not have current row version. So this piece of code here is trying to read the ID value from the current row version. Deleted rows will not have current row version. That's the reason why we had that exception. Okay, and original row version does not exist for rows with a row state of added. So for new rows that we have added to data row collection, original row version doesn't exist, and that makes sense, isn't it? Okay, so what is this proposed row version? The proposed value for the row. This row version exists during an edit operation on a row, or for a row that is not part of data row collection. So when is a row not part of data row collection? When you haven't added it to data row collection yet using the add method, or if you have removed it from data row collection using remove method, or if you have deleted it and if you have called AcceptChanges method. Alright, and here we have default. So the default row version for a particular row, the default row version for an added, modified, or unchanged row is current. The default row version for a deleted row is original, and the default row version for a detached row is proposed. Okay, so those are the different row versions, and these are the different row states. Now let's look at using AcceptChanges and RejectChanges methods. First, let's look at RejectChanges methods. Now I'm going to change the text on this button to undo, and within the click event handler, so we have the data set from the cache. So we are checking if this data set has got any changes. Look at this method HasChanges. What is it returning back? It's returning a boolean, true or false. So since the data set is loaded, using DataAdapter.Fill, if there are any changes at all that we have made to that data set, then this method is going to return true. For example, let's say I have edited some of the rows and I have deleted some of the rows, and then what I want to do is when I click this button undo, we basically want to revert those changes. Okay, and that's what we are trying to achieve now using RejectChanges method. So if there are any changes that are made to the data set, reject changes. And look at what the IntelliSense says here. Rolls back all the changes made to the data set since it was created, or since last time AcceptChanges was called. We'll discuss AcceptChanges in just a bit. Okay, so once we have rejected the changes that were made to the data set, what we want to basically do is store the data set back in the cache. And here is the code to store the data set back in the cache. So let's paste that there, and let's reload data from cache. And to do that, we are going to use load data. So what is that method to load data from cache? Get data from cache. So let's invoke that method. Okay, so if the data set has got changes, then this is what we are going to do. Else, let's actually make some changes to the HTML of this web form. Let's bring this label to the next line. Let's put an HTML break there. And let's set font bold to true. Okay, so within the label control, if the data set has not got any changes and if somebody clicks undo, then on that label I want to include this text. No changes to undo. And let's also set the forecolor of the label to red. System.drawing.color to red. On the other hand, if there are changes and if we have reverted them, then we want to say changes undone, and let's set the color to green. Alright, so with these changes, let's run this and let's get data from database. So let's edit this row, let's update that, let's delete 2 and 3. Okay, now let's click undo. Look at that, changes undone, and whatever changes we have done, they are reverted. Okay, now let's get data from the database. Now let's click this undo button. Did we do any changes yet to this data set? We didn't, right? So when we click this button, look at that, no changes to undo. So basically, what happens when we call RejectChanges method? So when RejectChanges is invoked, RowState property of each data row changes. Added rows are removed. Modified and deleted rows becomes unchanged. So basically, when we edit a row, what is going to happen to the RowState property of this row? It becomes modified. But then if we call RejectChanges now, what is going to happen? The RowState of that row is going to become unchanged because it's going to revert the changes back. Okay, so once we click this, the RowState of this row is now unchanged, and all of the rows is anyway, at the moment they are unchanged. Okay, now let's look at AcceptChanges. So what is this AcceptChanges method? Now this AcceptChanges method is called by the update method of the DataAdapter object automatically. Now look at this. When we make a change to the database, look at this, update. So this row is updated. Where is it updated? It's updated only within the data set at the moment. So if we examine the database values, here the name is still Mark Hastings, but within our data set it is Mark. Now when we click this update database table, what's going to happen? The value is going to be persisted in the database table. Now at the moment, what is the row state of this row? It is modified. Okay, so once I click this update database table, so the update method on the data adapter object is invoked, and then that's going to execute the update command, which is going to persist the changes to the database table, and a call to AcceptChanges is also invoked. And what is that method going to do? It's going to do this. So when AcceptChanges is invoked, RowState property of each data row changes. Added and modified rows become unchanged because they are committed to the database, and deleted rows are removed. Okay, now can we explicitly call AcceptChanges? Absolutely, there's nothing stopping us from calling AcceptChanges method. So what is this AcceptChanges doing? It's resetting, basically it's updating RowState property of each data row. Okay, added and modified rows becomes unchanged, and deleted rows are removed. Okay, so let's actually look at that. So we have the data set loaded from the cache, and let's invoke AcceptChanges method, and let's put this back into cache. And to do that again, let's copy this code, so let's run this. Get data from database. Now let's delete first row, second row, and let's update the fourth row. Okay, at the moment all these changes are done only within the data set. So if you look at the data here, so the underlying table is the same. We haven't updated that yet. Okay, now for the first and second row, what's the row state? Deleted. And for the fourth row, what is the row state? Updated. Now when we click this button, what is going to happen? We're going to call, here we're calling AcceptChanges method. So what is this AcceptChanges going to do? For the, we don't have any added rows, we only have modified row. For the modified row, what is going to happen to the row state? It becomes unchanged. And for deleted rows, what's going to happen? They will be removed from the data set altogether. Okay, so now when we click this button, so the row state for this row is unchanged. For deleted rows, they are removed from the data set. Now when I click this update database table button, do you think the underlying database table will be updated? No, it won't. Okay, so it says database table updated, but look at what happens the rows are not updated, and first and second rows are not deleted as well. And that's basically because AcceptChanges resets or changes total row property values. Added and modified rows become unchanged, and deleted rows are removed. Okay. And remember, both these AcceptChanges and RejectChanges methods can be invoked either at the data set level or the data table level, or at a specific data row level. When we invoke these methods at a data set level, they will get automatically invoked for all the data tables within that data set. And when you call them on a data table, they get automatically invoked for every data row within that data table. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.